It's now time for the beef market update here on Real Agriculture. And as always, we're joined by Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Anne, how are we doing?
I'm good today, Shaun. How about you?
Oh, pretty good. I know what's really good, and that is cattle prices. And what happened this week?
It's been another explosive week. Now, we're doing this recording a day early because I'm traveling, but even though it's Thursday, we've had U.S. markets absolutely explosive. Southern trades, it's trade in Texas and Kansas. Yesterday was 227 live, today 230. That's $5 to $8 higher again compared to last week. And Nebraska, we've just had a little bit of dress trade in Nebraska at 375 delivered. That is $5 to $10 a hundred higher than last week. So who would have thunk this cash market is just everybody's doubting it, and it just keeps carrying on. So absolutely amazing. Now, last year, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, Shaun, that markets did top in June, so now we've entered that month, and from a timing perspective, it could be similar to last year where those highs were at it or they're directly in front of us potentially.
Okay, so from a seasonality standpoint, this is kind of when we sort of get to the highs of this part of the year?
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened last year. So it feels like sometimes they're May, sometimes they're June, but it's feeling like we're on that track like last year. Now, the one thing, and we've talked about this, we've had good demand, so we watched that choice cutout. It's coming along, but I'd describe it more as a grinding higher, whereas that cash market we talked about exploding higher. So the choice cutout, and this is this morning's quote, but it was 367.5. That's up 1.5 from last week. So again, cattle prices jumping leaps and bounds, and wholesale beef prices clawing along. So that also means you've got packers in the red and deep in the red.
Kind of put some questions right now if you're trying to make a deal on grass cattle or just any cattle to be placing into your feed yard here between now and fall on some sort of forward contract. It kind of makes you question how you should be pricing them.
Well, and I suspect you don't have much leverage. Everything's just on the up and up. So hard to make any kind of deals. Feeder market's been following along, and any of the forward price cattle for fall, whether we're talking about calves or yearlings, is also just continuing to make new highs as well, and seeing more and more cattle getting offered on those forward sales like we talked about 2 weeks ago. So very, very explosive.
Hey, remember during the pandemic when Packer was huge in the green on the profitability side, a lot of concern from beef producers, and there was talk about how we need to have a price back to producers that was tied to that cutout. Remember that? That seems to be in the distant memory all of a sudden with some of these cash prices.
It's funny how the world goes around, doesn't it?
Yeah. Go ahead.
These cattle markets have long tails. Before we leave talking about fat cattle prices, I didn't want to forget, Shaun, about the Canadian market. So in Alberta this week, we did see 502 delivered, dressed as most of the cattle. Now, I think seeing what's gone on in the U.S., and that's fully steady with last week, I think Alberta packers have kind of slammed the gate closed, if you will, and are going to be looking and asking for more money on what's remaining that's ready to sell. And the other news, I don't often, unless I'm talking to Lindsay, mention the Ontario fat cattle market, but they've had an absolutely explosive week. They were $15 to $20 higher this week, dressed. $5.20 delivered was the Ontario rail grade price.
How come?
So it doesn't matter if we're talking about Texas, Ontario, or Alberta. We're smoking.
Yeah. Well, why the quick shot up in the Ontario price?
Probably a bit of a catch up. I think there was some lag going on in terms of the Alberta market. I mean, a bit of that seasonal that happens, and all of a sudden you see at this time of year as we kind of finish off the second quarter, you see the Ontario market move higher versus the Alberta market. So a little bit of it's a seasonality, but it's just so extreme. These prices just seem to be so extreme in their moves right now.
Yeah, and Stats Can has some information for us here. We wanted to chat about live cattle exports.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting, Shaun. Not a surprise, but it's always, for me anyways, interesting to see the data. So this is April live cattle exports. So remember last month we talked about such a busy first quarter, front-end loading ahead of the April 2nd tariff date, all that kind of news, and we'd shipped so many cattle to the U.S. in the first quarter. Well, in April, it absolutely died right off. And numbers were well off what we saw the pace in that first quarter. So in April, only 17,000 head of fat cattle went south. That compares to an average in the months of Jan, Feb, and March, each of 52,000. So big change there. And same even on the feeder cattle. There was only 5,000 feeders go south in April, whereas we were averaging for the first 3 months of this year 20,000 head. So everything changed in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's why it's going to be one of those years where, potentially as we look back years from now, like, what the heck happened in 2025? We're going to have to remember some of the circumstances and smooth
we're going to have a little asterisk beside this data point. Exactly.
Yeah. How about April retail prices?
Yeah, one other report that StatsCan was busy this week. One other report came out. And it was the retail prices, so beef prices, and these are national prices. They actually dropped a wee bit in April from March, 6%. I don't know if people would have maybe noticed that at the counter or not, but they're still 11% higher than last April. So that's what people are saying. Retail pork prices, big jump. Of course, they've been lagging well back, but a big 18% jump in April from March. And that also leaves them 12% higher than what they were back in April of 2024. Chicken prices not quite as, you don't see them move around quite as much. They were up a wee bit, 2% higher than they were in March and 1% higher than a year ago. So the big move was in pork, a little bit of softer pricing on beef. And again, typically here as we head into the second quarter of the year is when we'll see those retail prices tend to peak out for the year.
So kind of not exactly matching in terms of what we're seeing out there at the prices being paid to producers versus what's happening with pricing at the grocery store, just timing off a little bit.
Yeah, well, maybe not timing, but more of a catch-up.
Okay.
Recall that after COVID, that's when we really started to see some big moves on that retail price. And fat cattle prices, producer prices weren't moving. They're moving the other direction. And so over time, this is, what I'll define as a catch-up. And I suspect as we go forward over more time, we'll see it reverse back again. So they don't always match up piece for piece or, exactly on time, if you will. But over a longer period of time, they tend to work out. At some point, somebody's moving up and somebody's moving down. So right now the producer's making up for some long overdue time in terms of catching up with all these prices. Yeah.
And of course, everybody's watching Mother Nature. She'll have her say. We've had, obviously got the wildfire situation in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba. It's very, very concerning. We have had some showers in the southern parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan, but overall, we're going to need a lot more moisture going forward here.
Yeah, we're going to be watching that close, and even though we've been talking about what's gone on with cow slaughter so far this year and record prices for cull cows and heifer slaughter data is way down, but I think it's just simply too early to make a call in terms of what's going on at the cow-calf level with females, especially with those heifers, because of those, what you've just mentioned, the conditions out there in terms of, forage production and grass conditions. So that one's still very much on the watch list, and I suspect lots of decisions have not been put in concrete yet.
Well, really the whole western half of the U.S. too, right? Which is, it just seems like that's a story on repeat.
Yeah, it's very similar type storyline in terms of the, a big chunk of the cow area in the U.S. and what we're seeing in Western Canada.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Anne, thanks a lot for joining us. I know you're on the road and do appreciate you taking the time for us. All the best to you.
Okay, thanks. You too, Shaun.